So today represents the culmination of 2 semesters of work. First, underneath, and in a management simulation. First, understanding the science behind 5 environmental policy issues, and then taking those environmental policy issues and developing a management simulation for actually putting a program into place. Now, these issues of management that we dealt with, first the design of the program, and then who's going to do the work, how much will it cost, how will we figure out how to track it, and how will we know what to do to get this thing started. Those are questions that are undervalued in the world that you're about to leave as professionals. Everybody wants to think about the analysis. They want to do the quantitative work to figure out what to do, but the actual scut work of making things happen, nobody's interested in. And that's the work that, frankly, is most important. It's the work I've devoted most of my career to thinking about. How do we make things happen in the real world? It's nice to say, well, we should divest from fossil fuel companies, but then again, who turns the lights on? How do we get from here to there? How do we get to a decarbonized economy? How do we address the climate change issue in the real world with real people in their real lives? And so courses like sustainability management, like financial management, are about how do you make these things actually happen in the real world. And so today's session is first talking about 5 pieces of legislation that are not real. They've not happened. How do we make them real if they were to happen is really what we're going to talk about. So we're going to hear from 5 groups. We're going to start with Professor Rosen's group, which has been talking about bees for a couple of semesters, and we're going to hear all about saving America's pollinators. So if that group is ready, let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Byrum, and today I'll be presenting the implementation plan for the Saving America's Pollinators Act. I'd like to thank my team and faculty advisor for all of their hard work over the past 2 semesters. This is the agenda for the presentation. It'll start with an introduction of the problem at hand, followed by the bill and its goals. Afterwards, I'll go through the implementation plan and then finish with a summary of what the bill can accomplish following its implementation. This is David Hackenberg. He's a commercial beekeeper who supplies bees to farms to pollinate their crops. The pollination service that David and other APRs provide is indispensable. Nationally, it is a $15 billion service that enables farmers and ranchers to operate their businesses. But one morning in November 2006, David checked on his 400 bee colonies to find that almost all of his bees had vanished or died. His APR was not the only one experiencing high losses. Other commercial beekeepers were losing up to 90% of their hives. He brought public attention to the mass decline of commercial bees, called colony collapse disorder, which is largely attributed to the increasing use of neonicotinoids. These are a pesticide chemical applied to seeds and plants to kill insects that destroy crops. However, these chemicals don't discriminate between species, impacting pests and pollinators alike. Specifically, they decrease a bee's lifespan, hive resiliency to threats, and cognitive functions. Commercial bees are uniquely exposed to high concentrations of these chemicals because they are directly inserted into fields where these pesticides are applied. As a result, record numbers of commercial hives have been lost in the past decade. Additionally, because neonicotinoids spread easily through various ecosystems, non-commercial wild pollinators are also exposed. While those exact impacts are not confirmed for sure, it is estimated that 1 in 4 wild bees are at risk of extinction. As indicated by these maps and confirmed by other research, there's a strong correlation between rates of honeybee loss and neonicotinoid usage. But it also indicates the conflict between crop farmers and bee farmers. Crop farmers have to apply more pesticides because pests are flourishing due to warmer temperatures from climate change. Subsequently, commercial bees are directly exposed to more contaminated crops, jeopardizing their colonies. And despite the clear evidence of this harmful interaction, farmers increasingly depend on neonicotinoids because they are cheap, highly effective at killing insect life, and have flooded the market by pesticide companies that limit alternatives. Thus, it is both difficult and expensive for farmers to transition to safer methods of pest control, leaving commercial bees at risk. In addition, politics encumber legislative action to reduce neonicotinoid volumes. This is due to a notable urban-rural divide between the Saving America's Pollinators Act sponsors and the farmers they are trying to help. While all politicians may support pollinator conservation, urban sponsors are insulated from rural farm constituents, many of whom view pesticide regulation as a threat to their short-term income. Thus, the bill has not yet garnered a sufficient number of supportive rural legislators. Nonetheless, it has been reintroduced multiple times because it would be an effective means to protect pollinators. The Saving America's Pollinators Act seeks to eliminate the widespread usage of neonicotinoids through its three mandates. First, it would establish a 15-member pollinator protection board within the Environmental Protection Agency. Second, it would cancel current neonicotinoid registrations, which are the authorizations to manufacture, sell, and use a given pesticide. And third, it would require monitoring and research of commercial and wild pollinators to understand the effects of pesticides on these species. The bill distinguishes between commercial bees and wild pollinators because commercial bees are an important economic asset that can be managed by farmers, but wild pollinators are unmanaged and far less understood. Thus, the bill focuses on this measurable, known threat to commercial bees and improving our understanding of the lesser-known, unmanaged wild pollinators. The board would be composed of appointed stakeholders investing in pollinator and agricultural health. That includes organic farmers, commercial beekeepers, scientists, and conservationists, among others. This board would create a new evaluation process that is pollinator-centric to approve safe, new pesticides. The registration cancellation would cease the manufacturing and eventual sale of neonicotinoid pesticides in order to halt the chemical accumulation behind colony collapse disorder. And finally, the pollinator monitoring mandate would coordinate federal and non-federal research to understand the effects of pesticides on commercial and wild pollinators. This research would then feed into the board's evaluations. Now I'll discuss the implementation plan for the bill, which includes the timeline, first-year budget, and measures of success, as well as the staffing and organizational plans. The bill requires action by 3 federal agencies: the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the ultimate authority on pesticide regulation, the Department of Interior, which monitors pollinator and ecosystem health through its conservation mission, and finally, the Department of Agriculture, which oversees food policy and provides pollinator research grants. The EPA and its administrator, as the leading agency, is involved in all 3 mandates. It would house the Pollinator Board, roll out the pesticide ban, and join the Departments of Interior and Agriculture on research coordination. The combined work of these 3 agencies seeks to ensure food security through pollinator protection. Within those 3 agencies are sub-offices that handle various responsibilities. Within the EPA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Advisory Panel contributes scientific advice to inform the Office of Pesticide Programs policy work. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and U.S. Geological Survey within the Department of Interior monitor ecosystem and land use. And the Pollinating Insects Research Service conducts the Department of Agriculture's pollinator research. The bill's newly created Pollinator Protection Board would be housed in the EPA under the FIFRA Advisory Panel and would take advantage of the work already conducted by these 3 agencies, coordinating with the other offices to inform its pesticide evaluations. The mandates created by the bill would require the EPA to hire 9 new staff members. 4 of those staff would be in the newly created Pollinator Protection Board Support Office to help appoint the board and facilitate its meetings. The other 5 would be placed in the Office of Pesticide Programs to handle the additional work of executing the neonicotinoid ban, which would include working with outside pesticide producers, farmers, and regional EPA offices. The program incorporates deadlines set by the bill starting 6 months after it begins to take into effect. Prior to those dates, the federal legislation led by the EPA would lay the groundwork to meet those deadlines. The first half of the year would primarily be spent staffing for the program, communicating with entities affected by the ban, and coordinating agency roles. After staffing and appointments, the first board meeting would convene the diverse stakeholders to establish a baseline framework of the problem, as well as determine the role that each member plays within the board's evaluation mandate. The cancelled registration date would be the culmination of communication between the federal government and registration holders. The administrator of the EPA would first issue a notice of intent to cancel to the USDA for private comment, then a public comment period for registration holders. That public comment period could influence when retailers are prohibited from selling these pesticides in year 2, but it would not affect the strict manufacturing stop date at 6 months. Finally, the annual report would be an analysis of neonicotinoids' impacts as currently understood. It would be jointly produced by existing EPA, DOI, and USDA staff using current literature to inform the first board meeting. Subsequent reports would include new research as coordinated by the agencies. Implementing the program would cost $1.4 million in the first year. Approximately 1/3 of that will go towards paying for the 9 new staff members in the EPA, but that does not include their full year salaries because they would not be hired until at least the spring. The remaining and majority of the budget would go towards non-personnel service, which includes recruiting new staff, organizing board meetings, communicating with stakeholders, publications, and ban enforcement training. It should be noted that this budget includes the cost of the government coordinating with outside ongoing research, but does not fund research itself in the first year. Finally, the first year will use operational milestones to gauge progress towards the bill's long-term goals. In the first year, the Pollinator Board will be fully appointed and staffed and ready to begin its pollinator-centric evaluation process. The ban will have gone into effect, canceling registrations and ending the manufacture of neonicotinoids. After manufacturing ceases, we hope to see a 25% reduction in the application of these pesticides and even greater reductions in the second year after the prohibition on the sale of remaining stock goes into effect. Finally, the 3 federal agencies will have identified study sites and research partners and published the initial literature review outlining the scope of the problem and work to be done. This will set up research on commercial and wild pollinators in subsequent years. The ultimate outcome of the Pollinator Protection Board, the neonicotinoid ban, and research to improve our understanding of pollinators is one that we want to see. It is a future where apiarists like David Hackenberg and crop farmers are able to work in concert rather than conflict. The Saving America's Pollinators Act would improve pollinator ecosystem health, make agriculture more sustainable, and improve the livelihoods of bee and crop farmers, all while securing our nation's food supply. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Great job. My question is, do you know of any other countries that have enforced this ban, like, successfully?
Yeah, so we've mentioned in previous presentations that the EU has also implemented a ban. And a few years after the ban, some initial research has shown that it has successfully reduced neonicotinoid exposure to farm bees. However, there are still some suburban bees that are exposed. This is because it is not a comprehensive ban. There are still a number of neonicotinoid chemicals that have not been restricted and has not been applied to all crops. This would be a more effective legislation because it is a unilateral ban on all neonicotinoids and all crops.
Nice presentation, really clear. I did have one question though. Are there alternatives to neonicotinoids that seem to provide the same results that farmers are looking for?
So before these were introduced back in the 90s, there were safer pesticide alternatives. Now, like, not all pesticides are exactly the best, but these were not the same scorched earth method that neonicotinoids present. So while they would kill pests, they would not affect pollinators to the same extent. There's also integrated pest management, which is a more wholesome environmental examination of pest control, which includes introducing natural predators, controlling the environment to reduce pest infiltration, and similar, less invasive methods.
Given the the global decline in insect populations, partially attributed to pesticide drift and partially attributed to climate change, you mentioned in the EU that there were studies that showed a decrease in pesticide amount in bees. Have there been any studies that show after cessation of pesticide use an increase in pollinator populations in a certain area?
I have not seen any indication of an immediate rebound of these pollinator populations, but that is largely due to the fact that it takes some time for these chemicals to degrade in the environment. However, we do fully expect to see, once these are out of the system, for those populations to increase. As I mentioned in the presentation, they essentially both are harmful to pollinators in themselves, but also exacerbate other threats to pollinators like invasive species and pests and warmer temperatures. So if logic follows that reducing these will reduce the threat of those other threats and then increase the population.